Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everyone, I am so delighted to welcome Melody Wilding back to the podcast. She was one of my guests back in 2021. Melody is the author of the new book, Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. Named one of Business Insider's most innovative coaches for over a decade, she's been helping clients worldwide find their professional power position, the sweet spot where inner confidence and influence with others intersects. Her clients include CEOs, C-level executives, and managers at top Fortune 500 companies such as Google, Amazon, and JP Morgan, among others. Melody has been featured in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal and is a contributor to Harvard Business Review, Fast Company, Psychology Today, and Forbes. Melody is a licensed social worker with a master's from Columbia University, and she's a professor of human behavior at Hunter College. She is also the author of the book Trust Yourself, which we talked about the last time we were on this podcast together. So welcome, Melody. So happy to have you back.
I am thrilled to be back with you.
Before we turned on record, I was gushing over this new book. The way that the book is organized, the way that you have articulated all the approaches that people can take in managing up and the importance of managing up, and a lot of the ways that people miss the opportunity to manage up is really, I said it's almost like unlocking, a big, heavy door for a lot of people in the workplace. So I'm really curious, what compelled you to actually write this book? Yeah, how did it come about? Because I think it's going to help a lot of people. I certainly think most of my clients would benefit greatly from reading your book.
Well, it means a lot to hear that from you, someone I greatly respect and admire. So, I think a few things led to this book. First and foremost, when my first book, Trust Yourself, came out, I was hearing feedback from people who were saying, this is great. Now I feel more confident in myself, but I'm having trouble. My confidence falters when I have to interact with other people, specifically people that have more power than me. And, I heard that once, 5 times, 10 times, and people using that specific language, dealing with people that have more power than me. Yeah. And so that really made my ears perk up when you hear a pattern like that many times. Mm-hmm. And so there was this consistent idea of really holding your own, being able to stand your ground. And again, we talked way back in 2021, and a lot has changed since then, and people's attitudes towards work have changed. And I think we've seen a big awakening where people are not necessarily as motivated right now to climb the ladder. Of course, we all want to grow, we all want to advance, but I interviewed dozens of different people for this book. I surveyed 12,000 different people. And another interesting finding from that was people weren't as motivated by money or titles. When I asked, why is it important to you to learn how to manage up better? They would say things like, I want to feel more in control at work. I want to put my head on the pillow at night and feel like I was heard, like my ideas made a difference. And so if we're spending 70+% of our time at work, if our bosses are the people that we affect our well-being more than our spouse, our doctor, our therapist, and there's research showing that, then we better improve at being able to manage ourselves in that relationship. And I think that's something important about reframing what it means to manage up. That we're, if you think back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, there's this idea that managing up equals sucking up.
Right.
That it means knowing your boss's coffee order. When they say jump, you ask how high, laughing at their really terrible jokes. That's sort of this outdated idea we have of managing up.
Yeah.
And what I'm arguing in this book is that managing up is the most important skill set you need to gain more freedom, more authority, more respect and recognition at work, because it's about you creating the conditions you need to thrive. It's really not about your boss at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. I know there was something that you said there's a lot of things you said in the book that really resonated with me, but one that I'll point out now, and that is that you said, it isn't really about how you go. There is the how of managing up, and you do an amazing job breaking that down and giving people so many pathways for that. But you said it's more about taking control of your own work experience. And this is a time right now where that is more important than ever, because, gone are the days of the, 20, 30, 40-year career with one company kind of thing where people can get comfortable and feel taken care of. We all have to take care of ourselves within our work lives and our careers. And so that sort of sense of agency and ownership really does have to start with us. And it's not even about that like us versus them kind of dynamic. It's more about how do you behave as a professional in the workplace with people who are positionally above you in the organization, and how do you make sure that you're doing the kind of work that feels right to you as well, right?
That's right. That's right. And I know there's a lot of people in your audience and that listen to the show that are thinking about a change or in the middle of making a change to their work, maybe their career overall. And, there's something out there in the online career space. There's a lot of talk about toxic workplaces.
Yes.
And if you have a toxic boss, just leave. You deserve better. And I am 110% behind that.
Yes.
At the same time, it's not that easy for most people. Most of us, if we have difficulties with our boss or with our skip level or other stakeholders we have to deal with, we can't just get up and leave tomorrow. And at the time of this recording, the market we're in right now is pretty tight. I don't know about you, but everyone I've talked to, it's an employer's market right now.
Right. It is.
And so you may be in a position where you have to make the best of the situation that you're in.
Right.
Because you may need to bide your time a little bit before you are in a place to make a change. And when you make a change, my hope is that everything in this book will help you set yourself up for greater respect, to teach people how to treat you. That's a big philosophy behind the book. And it gets to what you were saying a moment ago. And so whether that's sort of changing or redirecting the dynamics where you are now, or it's starting fresh in a new role, you can literally follow the playbook in the book step by step through all of the conversations to really make sure that from day one, you're being respected, you're being taken seriously, you're building trust with the people that have more power than you.
Right. And, as you also say in the book, this starts at day one on the job. This isn't just, navigating the territory once you've been working with certain people for a while. This could be something that you're starting to navigate the day you walk in for an interview, right?
Oh, I would recommend that. Before we started hitting record, you and I were chatting about this a little, and I said the power dynamics start from the moment you enter that interview. Because usually you're sitting with someone who may be your boss, who may be your skip level, who may be someone who's going to have authority over your projects that you have to collaborate closely with. And that relationship with them starts in that very moment. So the way you conduct yourself, the types of questions you ask can either lead you to be perceived and or treated as someone who's a pushover, someone who's seen as more of just a subordinate executor, or someone whose ideas are taken under consideration, whose boundaries are respected. I don't want to put too much pressure on the interview moment, because the truth is you can have these conversations at any time. You can reset the dynamics, but, also thinking of those interviews as, I hate to say more of a two-way street, but I think what I see happen when I'm coaching clients around interview prep is that they feel like they are the ones being interrogated, and they just have to sort of answer the question in a concise, powerful way, and that's it. And I'm always advocating people to turn it into a dialogue.
Right.
So if they ask, well, can you tell me about how you've navigated client relationships in the past? And you give your little spiel about how you do that. And then you ask a question back. So tell me, why is that skill so important for this role? I would love to understand what's a situation where you think this might come up on a day-to-day basis, and engage them. That automatically flips, or I should say, equalizes the power dynamic. So it's not just them grilling you, it's you taking the power back and making it more of an even exchange.
Right. I totally agree with that. And I do think interviews, your mindset around interviews ought to be more of a two-way street, because there's a pretty good likelihood that the person who's interviewing you may not be the most experienced interviewer anyway. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. So you don't want to make the assumption that they have as much power as you are giving them. So, and again, it's not even about giving them or not giving them power necessarily, even though you're thinking of it that way, as much as you want to feel like you can show up and bring everything that you've got to that table, in a conversational way, not just in a way where you are trying to read their minds and figure out what they want to hear, right?
Yes.
I love the way that you've also laid this out in the book, because I think you've hit on so many facets of what people do go through in various work environments. And when I say, people go through, as if every work environment has, all these power dynamics that are difficult. And I don't want to paint it out to be all negative, because I think that a lot of what you offer in the book are great, and you say this yourself, are great ways to get to know yourself better and to stretch yourself in some ways, right? And so some of these are suggestions or ways in which you help people navigate territory, because we're all human beings. Nobody is perfect, and people behave in different ways. Your boss can come in one day and ask you to do something, and then the next day change their mind and say, no, do it this other way. And you're thinking they're crazy, but they're human. And so you map out these 10 conversations that really, to me, capture the heart of so many different but very real experiences people have. The other thing I just want to note here also is all the great scenarios and stories that you share throughout the book that are so, at least I think they're very relatable. Every story that I read was spot on in terms of things that I've seen people experience. So take us through some of those conversations, and which you have in the form of chapters that I think a lot of our listeners would love to get a taste of.
Yeah, I'll jump into that in just one moment. I want to just underscore a few things you said about, because there was so much good stuff there, where you were mentioning, our bosses are humans. They are not mind readers. And I think what I've tried to do is help people develop a little bit of upward empathy, or at the very least, have emotional intelligence for their own sake, to realize that when your boss is short with you that one time, or, shoots down your idea, it may not be because they hate it. It may not be because, they're a jerk. it may be because of the pressures, the priorities, the goals, all the things that are on them that you can't see. And so that's also what I tried to do with this book, is to help people or show the other side of the coin, since, as coaches, we get to work with people who are on, yes, the receiving end of boss behaviors, but we also get to work with people who are the bosses and get frustrated or feel, trapped when their team is frustrated at them, or they can't necessarily share something because of, dynamics that are happening above. And so I just wanted to give that perspective.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So diving into the 10 conversations, then that framework was important for me to develop because, again, I think managing up has gotten a bad rap over the last 30 years or so, not only as sucking up, but I think it's also been really boiled down to pithy one-liners that are helpful, but incomplete. Things like, well, come with solutions, not problems. Right. Okay, great. Get in your boss's head, know their priorities. But how? How do you do that? There's so much to that. And so the 10 conversations really were a response to that.
Yeah.
And they start with the most, I would say, fundamental and build on each other to get gradually more specific. When I use the term conversation in the book, that doesn't necessarily mean that this is like a one-time, formal event that you're having. These can be, taking advantage of little side moments before a meeting, or optimizing what you're doing in your one-on-ones, or sharing in an email. So as I'm talking through this, just think about conversation more broadly. All right. Starting with the first conversation, we have the alignment conversation. That is by far the most fundamental place you need to start. That is answering that question, how do you get in your boss's head to make sure that you are working on the right things? You are working on the highest value work. You're aligning yourself with that so you can position yourself for the later conversations, which are things like visibility, advancement, money, etc. And then we get into the styles conversation. That's one of my favorites. And this is again, gets at the idea that difficult doesn't necessarily equal toxic. Your boss may have a different communication style or work preferences from you. That doesn't necessarily mean they're wrong, nor does it mean you have to just chameleon and people please and just adapt to that. The idea is to flex while also being able to communicate and assert your own style and make those two things work together.
Mm-hmm. I would also imagine that this is where you start to see things like cultural differences, people who work together who come from, different countries and cultures, that's where styles, I bet, really start to show up.
Yeah. And in all of them, I would say cultural differences and also even generational differences.
Yes. Yeah.
So, this has come up a lot when I talk about, so if we have alignment, styles, the third conversation is ownership. And this is one where people have brought up to me, well, I'm Gen X. And back in my day, or the way I was taught in the workplace, you did do what you were told, versus someone who is in Gen Z has an expectation coming into the workplace that they will have more choice over their projects. They will do things that are more innovative and experimental. And so even those generational expectations can affect how these conversations play out, and even the tensions that can come up during them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So where do we go from that already sounds like a full bucket right there between alignment, styles, and ownership, but you've got many more.
Yeah. And so from there, once we take ownership, then we need to be mindful to have the boundaries conversation. Because, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And so the boundaries conversation really centers on how do you push back diplomatically. When you're given extra work, you're being asked to go to 5 different additional meetings, you're being asked to work late. How do you push back without being seen or labeled as difficult? Then what follows from that is the feedback conversation. And so specifically, this is about giving upward feedback. How do you communicate to your manager that you want them to get off your back and stop micromanaging you? Or that they give you vague instructions and they need to get their act together? How do you communicate those things in a way your manager is actually going to not only hear, but also do something about? And so those are the first, let's see, I think I went through the first 5 conversations.
Wow.
Yeah. And then so that really marks kind of a turning point in the book. Those first 5 are like, these are groundwork must-haves.
Yes.
And then there's a turning point in the book where it goes from more reactive conversations to proactive. And so the second half of the conversations are things like the networking conversation, the visibility conversation, advancement, money, and then the book rounds out with quitting. Since surprisingly, you still need to be conscious of managing up even when you're leaving your role because your reputation precedes you, right? And you never know when you might need those relationships or go back to the same company because a lot of people boomerang.
Yeah.
That from a high level is the 10 conversations. We can go anywhere you want with that.
Well, I mean that you did an amazing job just bringing that all to the fold. I think when I started reading, I wondered where the quitting conversation would come in. I know you have that as number 10, but it's not that these are, in some sort of, I mean, they are in an order of a sort, but yet you also say for some people looking at these different conversations as you have them outlined, sometimes you do want to just zero in on 1 or 2 that are particularly relevant. I guess I want to go back to the notion of people, starting to feel like maybe they are in a toxic situation. And I think what's toxic for one person may not feel toxic for another, right?
Exactly.
Everybody has their own thresholds for some of these things. And it's not to say that one's right and one's wrong. I mean, I think there are situations where they're in a toxic situation or even, a downright abusive situation. And yet, for a whole lot of very pragmatic or practical reasons, they're not in a position to walk away. And, I think there's that line that some people just can't cross, and yet it's very destructive, for them to stay in a job. I don't know the extent to which you address that, but I can imagine that quitting conversation starts to become very important for people. But also being able to apply some of the other conversations to moving forward, whether, an advancement, the money conversation, those can be, I think, applied very well as you're looking for what's next, right?
Yeah. And so to answer your question, the book, it was really important to me that, I meet people where they are as with life and reality as it is. And so every chapter has what to do when sections. So what to do when your boss just refuses to accept your no, for example, or what to do when you truly are working for someone who is narcissistic, for example. And I share the story of myself having worked for someone like that. And so all throughout the book, even for things like feedback, for example, or visibility, what do you do when someone more senior than you steals credit for your work or your boss is playing favorites? And so all of that is covered inside of the book. And the quitting conversation is also recognition that, at some point, you do have to value yourself enough to say, I've done what I can, and this is not working for me, and it's time to go.
Yeah.
And what I find more than not is people want to make sure they feel like they're leaving with their integrity intact. Yeah. And so even in the quitting conversation, I cover what do you do when you're asked to give an exit interview and you're not comfortable doing that? decline, or how do you shape your responses in a way that won't reveal things you don't want to do or get you into potential trouble in a way you don't want to.
Right. Yeah, there's, and this really does take us back to something we said at the beginning about just really needing to be that much more the person in charge, having the power of your own career in that way, right? And wanting to protect that as you move on, and not leaving any, burnt bridges behind you. Even if you are, left with some negative feelings, you just don't want to do that. So it feels like there's a lot of areas of the book that really cover things that I've heard a lot of people say, I just don't know what to do. And you offer them a lot of suggestions about how to go about approaching those things. And yet there's enough there for them to put their own touches on it. It's not like, do it this way. Melody says, do it this way. This is the way to do it. It's, here's the kinds of questions you need to be asking yourself or asking of others. And here's how to frame it. Now, put it into a context that's going to work for you.
And that's why, you mentioned there's tons of different examples in the book. And I wanted to do that because I didn't just want this to be a book that represents just knowledge workers, people that are in a typical corporate environment. So I have examples from people that are in clinical aspects of healthcare, teachers, therapists, a whole nonprofits, university environments, a whole range of professionals. So you can see how it might play out. And just going back to what you were saying a moment ago about the quitting conversation, basically this idea of optionality, having choice. I think another thing that's important to reframe about managing up is that it needs to extend, when it's done well, managing up extends beyond your boss. Managing up extends to building relationships with other people that have power, whether that is positional power, resource power, informational power. And that was specifically why it was really important to me that networking conversation be in the book. Because again, I think managing up has gotten this bad rap as something you do only when you have a toxic, difficult manager. And that's not true. This is career hygiene to do if you have a good boss, if you want to make a move now, later. And so I have scripts for setting up relationships with your skip levels, email templates that you can use to reach out to other leaders, to set up coffee chats and exactly what to say and how to run those to build the relationship, because that's the type of career insurance you need. Because when things aren't working well with your manager, I had someone, maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, a reorg happened. She was put under a manager who she did not like and did not get along with, but she was able to use a lot of the techniques that made it into this book to build a relationship with a woman who was her former skip level. And through that relationship, that VP said, you have a lot of potential here. Actually, I would love to tap you to run this center of excellence, and gave her this sort of plum project that moved her out under that terrible manager. And so that's just an example of, how having these conversations, you're planting seeds, yes. And you never know how they're going to grow or how you're going to take advantage of them.
I love that you pointed that out, that these are skills, techniques, tools really to have in your toolkit to build all kinds of relationships. As you were talking about that, I was thinking that these are also great for, how many people are in positions where, let's say they're doing project management and they've got all the responsibility and none of the authority, on these cross-functional teams. And they still need to have lots of different ways to be able to relate to people who are all very different from one another, have different ways of thinking, different ways of problem solving or approaching things, and running the gamut of all the ways that they're all different from one another, and yet having to be what we call a team. And everyone's got their own idea of what it even means to be a team, right? So we throw these words around, and yet there really does need to be that kind of really agility and skill with the way that you approach people, communicate, and find a way to reach them so that you can find that common ground to work with them on. And it's not always even about agreeing as much as I think finding that place where you can build some trust. At least that's what I'm hearing you say. And I know I make it sound so simple, but I know there's nothing simple about it. But I love the example you just gave of somebody who was able to stay with the company and move to a different role and still add value within the company. Because I think too often people feel like they're stuck, they don't have any recourse, and they just have to leave, and they make a quick decision rather than building some of those other relationships that might lead to something else that could be valuable.
Exactly. And, what is simple isn't always easy. Or what is that phrase? What's common sense isn't always common practice. And that's true for a lot of things when it comes to our careers in the workplace. But when it comes to managing up, so much of it is just about a basic understanding of human psychology. How are we motivated? Why do we behave the way they do or we do? And once you understand that, I think some of us feel like, well, I have to have an MBA or I need 30 years of experience in different types of organizations to develop this skill. And that's not true. Really, you need some keen observation. You need to maybe sharpen your communication skills a little bit, but just basic understanding of psychology. Why do people listen to certain ideas and requests over others? What makes people defensive or builds trust? All of those things, which I think is hopefully my sneaky agenda with this book, was to also give people skills that are going to help them in every single aspect of their life, because you need to manage up with your family, with other people in your life as well. And so that's been a lot of fun too, to hear from people like, oh, actually, this is useful in other parts of my life as well.
Yeah, I agree. Totally. You made me think. I had a conversation just yesterday with somebody who works in sales and does a lot of cold calling and, talking about all the different reactions that he gets from different people. And I was complimenting him on, the kind of courage I think it takes to do that kind of work. And he had a very good actually attitude about it. And he said, look, when somebody speaks unkindly towards me, when I've approached them, he said, look, I just ask myself, maybe, what happened to them? Something, maybe they had a bad day. Maybe they, had a bad experience with somebody, but he didn't take it personally. He didn't, even though sometimes people say things to him that are quite jarring, and yet he stopped, he paused and just said, they're probably having a bad day or something. And so you said this earlier about, people who, might work for a boss who's under a lot of stress. And there may be days when their behavior doesn't reflect the kind of behavior they want to receive from them, but it might be a reflection of just all the pressures they're under. Now, that doesn't excuse them totally. They need to develop some greater self-awareness too. But at the same time, I think sometimes we expect those people who are in a position above us to somehow have some higher levels of maturity and awareness than we do. And that's definitely not the case.
And you nailed it. And what I would also say, like, this is for your own sake too, because how much better will your night become if you ask yourself that question, like, wonder why my boss was so snappy in that meeting. Maybe they just got bad news. Maybe it's this, Q1 deadline that they're under versus this is a terrible job for me. No one listens to me here. Second guessing yourself. You're preoccupied at the dinner table with your family. Which one is much better? And to your point, not excusing that type of behavior in any way.
Right.
But at least when you're able to take that broader perspective, you can respond in a more from a place of strength with greater, more just grounded assertiveness rather than you also coming to the situation heated or frustrated, which only escalates it.
Right. And it creates more misunderstanding too, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So in wrapping up here, Melody, is there anything else that we want to make sure people know about with regard to your work or the book at this point?
See, we covered a lot. I'm trying to think if we didn't touch on anything. I guess the one thing I'll say, just that goes along with our conversation today about creating more options for yourself, is the advancement conversation. And I'm also very passionate about helping people realize that advancement can be other things besides just a promotion.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you saw, there was a study done recently or a survey done recently that was getting a lot of press around how people are actively declining promotions because people don't want extra responsibility. They don't want more stress. Mm-hmm. And so in that chapter, I really try to encourage people to broaden their idea of what advancement can look like for them. Mm-hmm. Sure, it can be a title change, but it could be managing more people, like expanding your team. It could be taking on a different skill or leading a different type of project. It could look like a lot of different things.
Right.
And another important thing with advancement is you have to start early, because the biggest mistake I see people make is that they hold on to their plans and their desires until their performance review. Mm-hmm. And at that point, it's too late for your boss to make a decision. Mm-hmm. Those decisions were made months ago, and your performance review is when it's being communicated.
Right.
And so it's so important to be able to, in a gentle and diplomatic way, seed that interest over time. Mm-hmm. Because not only does that help your boss familiarize themselves with what you want, so that when you make an explicit request, it doesn't feel like it's coming out of the blue, but it also allows you to test the waters and see, like, what type of pushback am I getting? Who else needs to be involved in this type of decision that I may need to influence or get in front of, build visibility with? And so that's, I think, what I would leave people with is to think a bit longer term about their own plans and have a little more boldness and confidence about putting them out there.
I love that. I think that makes a ton of sense. And I do think that just like you have suggested, we really redefine what managing up means, we need to also be redefining what advancement means. And I think you just did it. So, Melody, I want to thank you so much for being here today. This has been a great conversation. I can't emphasize enough that this book is, I think it's going to change a lot of people's lives at work and how they navigate their careers. I can't emphasize that enough. So I'm going to encourage people to get their hands on your book. And it's called Managing Up: How to Get What You Need from the People in Charge. And I think it's also, how do you get what you need from yourself? That's my subtitle for it. Melody, thank you so much for being here. This has been a delight. Thanks for coming back.
Oh, thank you, Tammy. It's always fun joining you.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of my interview with Melody Wilding. What is your key takeaway from our conversation? If you are interested in any of the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find them in the show notes on my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just look for episode 271. And while you're there, you can also subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes. Did you know that ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts can help this podcast reach more people? Please help me to inspire more people to move their careers in meaningful directions by clicking on the Apple Podcasts button on my website. Leave an honest rating and brief review. I'd be so grateful. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Check out my award-winning book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles and design a career that fulfills you. It's available through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, or through your local library. You can also help sustain this podcast by buying me a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com/TammyGL. Since this podcast is self-funded, your support is acknowledged and appreciated. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.